He called it a special brew, just for his wife. But her own husband's smile felt off. The coffee's scent. Alarming. Was it paranoia? Or was her deepest fear unfolding at the family table? She had one chance to turn the tables. One switch. What secret was brewing in that cup? And who would pay the price? My name is Christina, and at 29, I'd always envisioned life as a series of sun-drenched Nashville mornings, filled with laughter, love, and the comforting routine of family. From the outside, perhaps that's exactly what my life with James looked like. A successful young woman, happily married, integrated into his seemingly welcoming family. We had a beautiful home, careers that were taking off, and these monthly brunches at my sister-in-law Nina's elegant house were meant to be a cornerstone of that idyllic picture. The surface can be so deceiving, can't it? The calm exterior of many lives often hides turbulent currents beneath, and a strength most people never see. Does this familiar scene, a family gathering tinged with an unspoken tension, remind you of a quiet warrior in your own life? Someone who faced hidden battles with resilience? I'd be moved to hear your thoughts in the comments below. But that particular Sunday, the polished gleam of Nina's dining room felt less like a comfort and more like a stage for a play. I was desperately trying to understand. Don't you want to try the coffee I made especially for you, honey? My husband, James, asked, his voice a little too bright, accompanied by an odd smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. It was a small thing, that smile, but it was the first crack in the morning's fragile facade. I was seated at Nina's perfectly set table, the scent of expensive flowers mingling with something else, something emanating from the cup placed deliberately before me. It had a strange, almost metallic smell, acrid and unsettling. A scent that made my stomach instantly turn and my senses scream a silent warning. In that moment, the question I'd been pushing down for months, for years even, roared to the surface. Was my own husband, the man I had vowed to spend my life with, actually trying to poison me? It sounds like something out of a twisted novel, not the reality of a 29-year-old marketing executive. Yet, after 3 years of marriage, those years had been punctuated by far too many accidental food poisonings, mysterious illnesses that always seemed to strike after a meal shared with James, or more specifically, with James and Nina. I had learned the hard way to be cautious, to listen to that nagging voice of self-preservation, especially when Nina was involved. She had this uncanny ability to orchestrate situations that left me sick or humiliated, or both. Always with that same veneer of innocent concern James was wearing right now. "How thoughtful of you," I replied, forcing a smile that I hoped concealed the frantic race of my thoughts. My mind was a whirlwind, replaying a highlight reel of every unexplained illness. Every doctor's visit that ended with a shrug and no answers. The aroma wafting from the cup was unlike any coffee I'd ever smelled. It wasn't the rich, comforting scent of roasted beans. It was sharp, chemical, and it chillingly reminded me of the time just last month when I'd ended up in urgent care after drinking tea at Nina's house. The doctors couldn't explain my severe cramping and dizziness then. And Nina had insisted with wide-eyed sincerity that she'd made the tea exactly the same way she always made her own. Nina watched me intently from across the table, a picture of Southern grace absently stirring her own untouched coffee. There was a predatory stillness about her, a focused energy that always set my nerves on edge. "James has become quite the barista lately," she said, and was that a smirk playing on her lips? "He's been practicing different brewing methods, just for you." The way she emphasized "for you" sent a fresh wave of chills down my spine. It wasn't a kind emphasis. It was possessive, almost threatening, as if I were a project, an experiment. My suspicion, already a live wire, sparked with renewed intensity. I had noticed James spending more time at Nina's house lately. He'd claimed they were planning a surprise for our upcoming anniversary, a plausible excuse on the surface. But something felt deeply off. There were the whispered conversations that would abruptly stop when I entered a room, the strange, quickly hidden texts I'd glimpsed on his phone, filled with code words and urgent tones. And now, this coffee, with its peculiar, almost dangerous scent. It felt like all these disparate threads were tightening into a noose around me, and this cup was the focal point. I lifted the heavy ceramic cup, pretending to be on the verge of taking a sip, my eyes darting between James and Nina, studying their expressions. Their guard was down for a split second, just long enough for them to exchange a quick, almost imperceptible glance. It was fleeting, but it was there, a shared knowledge, a silent confirmation that screamed louder than any words. My suspicions weren't just paranoia, they were real. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had to think, and I had to think fast. Any direct confrontation would be denied, twisted and used against me, just like before. Making a show of checking my phone, feigning surprise, I stood up abruptly. "Oh, would you look at that?" I exclaimed, trying to sound casually annoyed. "I completely forgot. I need to make a quick call for work. It can't wait." Nina would. "You mind terribly if I used your study for a few minutes? It's just for some privacy." My voice was a little higher than usual, but I hoped it passed for professional urgency. As I walked past Nina's place setting, my path conveniently taking me close to her, I deliberately stumbled, my hand reaching out as if to steady myself. In that split second of orchestrated confusion, my fingers moved with a speed and precision born of pure adrenaline, quickly and seamlessly switching our coffee cups. "Oh, I'm so sorry," I exclaimed, straightening up, feigning embarrassment, making sure to jostle the table just enough to make the switch seem like part of the clumsiness. I'm such a klutz sometimes, especially before my first coffee of the day. I tried for a self-deprecating laugh, hoping it sounded genuine. Nina, to her credit, barely flinched, though her smile tightened almost imperceptibly at the edges. She waved off my apology with a gesture that was a little too dismissive. "It's quite all right, Christina. Just try not to break anything valuable in the study, dear." Her tone was smooth, but her eyes held a glint I was beginning to recognize. "All too well," I nodded, offering another quick, apologetic smile, and hurried away towards the study, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. My palms were sweating, but my mind was surprisingly clear. I had to know. It's charade. These constant illnesses, the gaslighting, it had to end. Through the study's doorway, which I left slightly ajar, I could still see them at the table. Now all I had to do was wait and watch. The bait was set. The question was, who would take it? From the study doorway, a sliver of visibility was all I needed. I watched Nina lift the coffee cup, my coffee cup, now hers, to her lips. My stomach clenched with a nauseating mix of anxiety and a grim sort of anticipation. A horrible part of me, the part that still clung to some shred of hope that this was all a terrible misunderstanding, wanted to rush out to stop her, to warn her. But a stronger, more hardened part, the part that had been forged in months of pain and suspicion, knew I needed to see this through. I needed the truth, undeniable and raw, no matter how ugly it might be. I had spent far too many nights writhing in emergency rooms. Too many hours doubled over in inexplicable agony. Always after sharing meals with them, or consuming something Nina had graciously prepared. It hadn't always been like this, or perhaps I had just been too naive to see it. When I first met James at a friend's wedding right here in Nashville 3 years ago, he was the epitome of Southern charm, attentive, witty, and seemingly captivated by me. Nina, his older sister, had appeared welcoming too at first. She'd been quick to invite me to family gatherings, offering to help plan our wedding, playing the role of the supportive future sister-in-law perfectly. But looking back now, with the clarity of hindsight sharpened by suffering, I should have noticed the red flags, those subtle little jabs and accidents. The way she would accidentally spill red wine on my dress at important events, always a white dress, of course. or how my food, whenever she helped cook, always seemed to have an extra overwhelming kick of seasoning. Just enough to make me mildly unwell or trigger a flare-up of an allergy I hadn't known I possessed. The incident started small, insidiously. So, an upset stomach here, a mild allergic reaction there, a sudden bout of dizziness. James, my loving husband, always had an excuse ready, a placating explanation. Maybe it was something you ate earlier, honey, he'd say. Or, you must be coming down with something. You've been working too hard. He was so convincing, so concerned that I doubted my own perceptions. But the pattern, once I allowed myself to see it, was becoming terrifyingly clear. The incidents were escalating, growing more severe, more debilitating. The worst had been just 2 months ago when I ended up hospitalized for 3 days after eating breakfast at their house. The doctors found traces of something unusual in my system, something they couldn't identify. But James, ever so smoothly, convinced everyone, including my own bewildered parents, that I must have accidentally taken some expired medication. He'd looked so worried, so caring as he'd spun that tale. I gripped the doorframe, my knuckles white, watching as Nina took another, larger sip of the coffee. James was typing on his phone, seemingly unconcerned. Perhaps texting Nina another congratulatory note on their success. My own untouched cup, the one he had prepared especially for me, sat cold on the table where I'd left it. The metallic smell still faintly lingering in my nose from my earlier inspection, making me shudder involuntarily. A slight tremor in Nina's hand caught my attention. It was almost imperceptible at first, but then it became more pronounced. She set down the cup with a clatter that was too loud in the otherwise quiet room, her face suddenly unmistakably pale. "James," she said, her voice shaking, losing its usual composed timbre. Something's wrong." James looked up from his phone, his initial expression one of mild annoyance, which quickly morphed into confusion, and then, as his eyes darted from Nina to the cup she'd been drinking from, to a look of pure, unadulterated horror. It was the look of a man whose meticulously crafted plan had just exploded in his face. He jumped up so violently that his chair clattered. "Backward to the floor, Nina." "Nina, what's happening?" he stammered, his composure shattering. Nina's hands were trembling violently now, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the table. I don't feel." She tried to stand but stumbled, her legs seeming to give way beneath her. She grabbed the edge of the table for support, her eyes wide with a dawning, terrified understanding. "James," she gasped, her voice raspy. "What did you put in that coffee?" That was my cue. I stepped out of the study, my phone already in my hand, the video recording function activated. The small red light was a beacon of my resolve. James was beside Nina now, his face ashen, his eyes flicking between her and me. "That wasn't supposed to be your cup," he whispered, a desperate, horrified admission. But in the charged silence of the elegant dining room, his whisper carried with perfect, damning clarity. Nina's eyes, already wide with fear, widened further with realization and a profound sense of betrayal. Call an ambulance," she gasped, her body starting to slide from her chair towards the floor. "Please, I can't." Her breath was coming in ragged gasps. I dialed 911 immediately, my hands surprisingly steady despite the chaos unfolding before me, the adrenaline giving me a strange, cold clarity. Nina was on the floor now, her body racked with violent tremors, her expensive brunch dress twisted around her. James knelt beside her, panic etched across every feature of his face as he realized their sinister plan had backfired in the most spectacular, and for him, terrifying way. "Emergency services. What is your location?" "Dispatchers." Calm voice came through my phone. "Yes, we need an ambulance at 1542 Maple Grove Drive." I said clearly, ensuring my phone's microphone was picking up everything. My other hand still steadily recording the scene. My sister-in-law appears to be having a severe reaction to something. In her coffee, she's conscious but experiencing violent tremors and difficulty breathing. As I spoke to the dispatcher, relaying information, Nina's eyes, clouded with pain and fear, locked onto mine. The usual cold calculation in her gaze was gone, replaced by raw, unadulterated terror. "Christina," she gasped, her voice hoarse. Accusation and dawning comprehension warring within it. You switched them. You knew." The dispatcher's voice reassured me. "Ma'am, the ambulance is on its way. Please stay on the line with me." James was growing more frantic by the second, babbling, "Nina, what's happening?" That wasn't supposed to. It wasn't meant. For his words tumbled out, incoherent and incriminating. "Shut up, James." Nina snapped, her voice surprisingly strong through gritted teeth, her anger momentarily overcoming her physical distress. "This is all your fault. You said it would just make her sick enough to miss the board meeting next week. You promised it wouldn't be traced. My blood ran cold." "The board meeting, of course. The board meeting at my firm where I was scheduled to present my proposal for a major new client account, the Henderson account. The very same account I knew Nina had been desperately trying to land for months at her competing firm." Suddenly, everything started clicking into place with sickening clarity. "The tea last month," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, cutting through their panicked exchange, "and the breakfast incident 2 months ago. Those weren't accidents, were they?" "They were all timed." Nina's face contorted with another wave of pain and, perhaps, the dawning horror of her own confession. "The tea," she gasped, clutching her stomach, doubling over. "That was supposed to keep you home during the Johnson contract presentation." "But you went anyway, damn you," James said. "He said we just needed to discredit you, make clients think you were unreliable, always calling in sick." The distant but rapidly approaching sound of sirens filled the air, a soundtrack to their unraveling. The carefully constructed facade of their lives was crumbling before my very eyes, and I had the front row seat, evidence in hand. Their web of deceit was far more intricate and malicious than I could have ever imagined. But the truth was finally clawing its way to the surface. The question now was, just how deep did their treachery go, and what would it take to expose it all? The sirens were getting closer, but the real storm was just beginning. Continue watching to see justice unfold. James stood up, backing away. From both of us, his face a mask of disbelief and terror as the sirens grew deafeningly loud. "Nina, stop talking. You don't know what you're saying," he pleaded, but his words were drowned out by the paramedics bursting through the front door. I quickly stepped aside, my expression carefully neutral, allowing them to assess the scene and get to Nina. They were efficient, professional, asking quick questions, their focus entirely on Nina, who was now moaning, her earlier bravado completely gone. As they expertly loaded her onto a stretcher, I stopped recording on my phone. My first action was to send the video file to my private, secure email address. Then immediately forwarded it to my lawyer with a brief, urgent message. A digital breadcrumb trail, irrefutable. James stood frozen near the doorway, watching as his carefully constructed life. His web of lies crumbled around him in real time. He looked like a man witnessing his own execution. "I'll ride with her to the hospital," I told the paramedics, my voice firm, cutting through James's stunned silence. There was no way I was letting Nina out of my sight, or rather, out of the sight of medical professionals who could document what was truly happening to her. After all, I added, my gaze flicking to James, meeting his terrified eyes with a coldness I didn't know I possessed. "I need to make sure my sister-in-law gets the proper treatment." I let the unspoken implication hang in the air. "And I'm sure," I continued, my voice dropping slightly for his ears as much as the paramedics. The doctors will be very interested in knowing exactly what was in that coffee. The color drained further from his already pale face. He opened his mouth as if to protest, to explain, but no words came out. He just stared, trapped. The emergency room at Nashville General Hospital was a predictable flurry of controlled chaos. Doctors and nurses moved with urgent purpose, their voices calm but authoritative as they rushed to stabilize Nina. I sat in the brightly lit, sterile waiting room, the antiseptic smell sharp in my nostrils. My phone was clutched tightly in my hand and under the guise of checking messages. I replayed the recording of Nina's frantic confession, the sound muted, the video playing on a loop. The tremors in her voice, the sheer panic in her eyes as she implicated James, the details of their twisted plan to sabotage my career. It was all there, damning and undeniable. This wasn't just paranoia on my part. This was calculated, malicious, and I finally had the proof. The journey to uncover the full extent of their betrayal was far from over, and every piece of evidence was crucial. If you're finding yourself gripped by Christina's determination to expose the truth, show your support by hitting that like button. And consider subscribing so you don't miss a single shocking revelation as this story unfolds. Family of Nina Anderson. A nurse called out from a doorway, her voice cutting through the low hum of the waiting room. I stood up immediately, noting James's conspicuous absence. He'd mumbled something about parking the car a good 20 minutes ago. After following the ambulance in our own vehicle and hadn't returned, a coward to the very end, it seemed, or perhaps he was already trying to concoct a new story, a new escape route. I'm her sister-in-law, I said, my voice steady. As I followed the nurse through the double doors into a quieter corridor. How? Is she? I asked, trying to sound like a concerned relative, though my mind was racing with other, less charitable thoughts. She's stabilized for now, the nurse replied, her expression graved as she led me towards a consultation room. But we found concerning levels of various toxins in her system. The doctor would like to speak with you about some unusual findings. In her blood work, it's not presenting like typical food poisoning. My heart gave a grim thud of validation. Toxins. Not an upset stomach, not a sudden flu, deliberate. Dr. Phillips, a tall, no-nonsense woman with graying hair pulled back. Severely and sharp, intelligent eyes was waiting for us by Nina's room. She introduced herself and got straight to the point. Mrs. Bennett, could you tell me exactly what happened before your sister-in-law became ill? Any details? No matter how small, could be important. I took a deep breath, the moment I had rehearsed in my mind countless times, finally here. I pulled out my phone. Doctor, I began, my voice even before I explain. I think you should listen to this first. It might provide some context. I pressed play on the video recording from brunch, keeping the volume low but audible enough for her to hear clearly. I watched Dr. Phillips's expression change, morphing from professional concern to startled attention, then to outright alarm. As Nina's panicked words and James's horrified interjections filled the small space, she listened intently, her eyes occasionally flicking up to meet mine, a new understanding dawning in their depths. When the recording finished, Dr. Phillips was silent for a moment, her brow furrowed. "This is very serious," she said finally, her voice low as she began making rapid notes on a digital tablet. "The primary substance we've identified in her system isn't something that accidentally ends up in coffee, Mrs. Bennett. It's highly controlled. We're looking at deliberate contamination and, frankly, a very dangerous dosage." Just then, as if summoned by the gravity of the doctor's words, James appeared at the end of the hallway, his face pale and sweaty. He'd clearly been lurking, perhaps trying to gauge the situation, and had obviously overheard at least the tail end of the doctor's pronouncement. "Christina." He started taking a hesitant step towards me, his voice strained, attempting a placating tone. "Let me explain. This is all just a terrible— Stay right where you are, Mr. Anderson, Dr. Phillips warned. Her voice suddenly sharp and authoritative, cutting him off mid-sentence. She discreetly pressed the nurse's call button on the wall panel beside her. "Security to room 412, please," she said calmly into the intercom. James froze, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender, his eyes wide with a new level of panic. "This is all a misunderstanding," he insisted, his voice rising slightly. Nina was confused. She didn't know what she was saying. She's been under a lot of stress. He was grasping at straws, his explanations becoming more desperate and less believable by the second. "Really?" interjected, my voice cold as ice. I'd had enough of his lies. I pulled up the series of texts I'd discovered on his phone last week, the ones I'd secretly photographed and then forwarded to myself before he could delete them. The ones he thought were so cleverly concealed. So these messages between you and Nina, the ones discussing making sure I was out of commission before the Henderson presentation next week, those were just friendly conversation, were they? Planning my surprise anniversary party, perhaps? His face drained of all remaining color, leaving it a ghastly shade of gray. You went through my phone," he stammered, his voice a hoarse whisper, the accusation weak and desperate. "After I found the rather interesting collection of small, unlabeled vials in your desk drawer at home." "Yes, James, I did," I replied, my gaze unwavering. I then turned back to Dr. Phillips, who was watching this exchange with an increasingly grim expression. "Doctor," I said, my voice clear and firm, "I've been hospitalized 3 times in the past 6 months with unexplained, severe symptoms. Symptoms that were always dismissed, always explained away. I'd like to know if the toxins you found in Nina's system today match anything that might explain my previous illnesses. I suspect you'll find a pattern." The doctor's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "We'll need to run some comparative tests, of course," she said. "And security will make sure your husband remains available for questioning by the authorities, who I believe should be contacted immediately." As if on cue, 2 uniformed security guards appeared, positioning themselves discreetly but firmly on either side of a now visibly trembling James. He looked trapped, his carefully constructed world imploding. "Nina and I," he stammered, his eyes darting between me, the doctor, and the impassive security guards. We were just trying to help you slow down, Christina. You were working too hard, taking all the big clients, pushing yourself to the brink. Nina said if we could just make you take some time off, rest a little." His voice trailed off lamely as he saw the disbelief and disgust on our faces. "By poisoning me." My voice was dangerously steady, even as a tremor of rage coursed through my hands. "Is that your idea of helping, James? How long have you been helping me like this? Was it you who tampered with my food at the company Christmas party too? When I got so violently ill I missed the awards ceremony?" James's ensuing silence was all the answer I needed. Behind him, through the window of her room, I could see Nina lying in her hospital bed, connected to various monitors. Her earlier bravado was completely gone, replaced by the vacant, terrified stare of someone who knew unequivocally that their elaborate schemes had finally, irrevocably caught up with them. The game was over. "Detective Mendoza is on her way." "Mrs. Bennett," Dr. Phillips said quietly, her expression sympathetic yet professional. "Do you want to take formal statements from everyone involved?" I nodded, a strange, almost surreal sense of calm settling over me. The whirlwind of fear and adrenaline was beginning to subside, replaced by a steely resolve. The truth, however ugly, was finally clawing its way into the light, and there was no going back now. There was a perverse relief in that. The charade was over. Detective Maria Mendoza arrived within the hour. Her presence was commanding, filling the sterile hospital corridor with an air of quiet authority. She was a seasoned investigator, her sharp eyes missing nothing. And I learned later she specialized in complex domestic abuse and assault cases. She listened intently without interruption. As I played the full recording from brunch, my voice steady as I provided context. I then showed her the text messages I had salvaged from James's phone, each one a small nail in the coffin of his denials. Her expression remained largely unreadable, but I saw a flicker of something grim understanding, perhaps in her eyes. "Mrs. Bennet," she said, after carefully reviewing her notes and the digital evidence I provided. "You mentioned previous hospitalizations. Can you tell me more about those incidents? Were reports filed?" I pulled out my phone again, this time opening a meticulously kept document I'd been covertly maintaining for months, a secret log of my suffering. First time was in February. I began, my voice even after a dinner at Nina's house. Experienced severe stomach pains, vomiting, and dizziness. The doctors at the time suspected a severe foodborne illness, but couldn't pinpoint a source. The second was in April, I continued. That was the tea incident I mentioned earlier, which Nina confessed to on the recording. The symptoms were similar, but with more pronounced neurological effects, tremors, and disorientation. Then again in June, after having breakfast with both James and Nina, each time the symptoms were similar in their debilitating nature, but just different enough that the doctors struggled to find a consistent cause. And I was made to feel like I was either exaggerating or prone to mysterious ailments. The detective's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly as she looked at my detailed log of dates, symptoms, specific foods or drinks consumed, locations, and the circumstances surrounding each event. "And you've been keeping these detailed records ever since you noticed the pattern?" she asked, a note of respect in her voice. I hesitated for a moment, then decided full transparency was my only true ally now. I reached into my purse and pulled out another older model phone. I also started carrying a backup phone with a different prepaid number. I admitted, feeling a flush creep up my neck. Felt excessively paranoid at the time. I used it to occasionally record conversations when I was around them, especially if James and Nina were discussing business or plans that seemed to exclude me or involve me in a way that felt off. I navigated to the audio files. I have several recordings where Nina and James discuss their plans regarding me and my career, though they're often careful not to be too explicit, using coded language. But the intent is clear. I played one for her. In the recording, Nina's voice came through, sharp and ambitious. "The Henderson account is worth millions. James, we absolutely cannot let Christina ruin everything we've worked for. She's becoming a liability to my ambitions. Just stick to the plan. Few more days of her being unwell should be enough to make them reconsider her for the lead." James's response was equally damning, his tone conspiratorial and disturbingly eager. "Don't worry, I've got something a bit stronger this time. She definitely won't make it to that crucial presentation next week. This will be more convincing." Detective Mendoza's expression hardened as she listened, her jaw tightening. Through the small window of Nina's hospital room, I could see my sister-in-law was now awake, propped up against her pillows, looking significantly less confident and far more terrified than she had at brunch. The reality of her situation seemed to be dawning. The hospital is running comprehensive toxicology screens on Mrs. Anderson. Detective Mendoza informed me, her voice all business. Dr. Phillips has already preliminarily identified several substances in her system that don't occur naturally and are consistent with what you've described. We'll need to obtain samples from your home as well, Mrs. Bennet, and potentially from Mr. Anderson and Mrs. Anderson's residences and offices, with warrants, of course. Just then, a commotion down the hall caught our attention. James was arguing with the security guards, his voice rising in desperation, no longer attempting any pretense of calm. "I need to speak with my wife," he shouted, his voice echoing. "Christina, please, you don't understand. We were just trying to protect you from yourself." Detective Mendoza stepped calmly but firmly between us as James tried to push past the guards. "Mr. Anderson," she stated, her voice cutting through his tirade, "you're not helping your case or your sister's. We've already found significant evidence suggesting premeditated actions." Premeditated. James laughed, a hollow, desperate sound that echoed unnervingly through the corridor. Premeditated? What? We were just trying to slow her down. She was working herself to death, taking all the major accounts, making Nina look bad. Nina said if we could just make her take some time off, get her out of the running for a bit. He was rambling, digging himself deeper with every word. By poisoning her, Mr. Anderson. Detective Mendoza's voice was sharp as a shard of glass. That's not protection. In legal terms, that's aggravated assault, potentially attempted murder, depending on the full toxicology and intent we uncover. The color drained completely from James's face, leaving him looking like a ghost. "Murder," he whispered, the word catching in his throat. No, that's not. We never meant to. To hurt her like that?" His eyes were wide with a new, dawning horror. Not for me, I realized, but for himself. "Then what exactly did you mean to do, James?" I asked, my voice surprisingly calm, though my insides were a knot of cold fury. "When you put that substance in my coffee this morning, what was supposed to happen to me?" James's silence was deafening, his gaze dropping to the floor. He couldn't meet my eyes. He couldn't answer the question because any answer would be an admission of guilt to something heinous. Behind him, I could see Nina watching through her hospital room window, her face a mask of fear and shrewd calculation. Even now, I wondered if she was trying to figure out how to spin this, how to explain away months of systematic poisoning as some sort of misguided, benevolent attempt at helping me. Witnessing such a calculated betrayal from those closest to you is a chilling thought, designed to undermine your very sanity. Has anyone ever experienced a moment where they had to trust their gut feeling, a deep-seated intuition, even when evidence was scarce or others dismissed their concerns? Share your story of intuition in the comments below. Your experience might empower someone else listening who is doubting their own perceptions. We'll need both of their phones immediately. Detective Mendoza told the security guards, gesturing towards James and then towards Nina's room. "And I want uniformed officers posted at both Mr. Anderson's and Mrs. Anderson's hospital room doors. Nobody leaves and no unauthorized visitors. Until we get the full toxicology results and the district attorney's office has been briefed." She was taking no chances. The net was closing swiftly and surely. Dr. Phillips re-entered Nina's room. A short while later, a tablet in her hand, her expression grim as she reviewed a new set of test results that had just come in. Detective Mendoza and I followed her, while James remained outside with the guards, his head now bowed. The fight, seemingly gone out of him. Nina tried to sit up straighter in her hospital bed as we entered, attempting to muster some semblance of her former authoritative self. But the tremors hadn't completely subsided, and her pallor was alarming. She looked like a wilted flower. The detailed toxicology report shows elevated levels of several concerning substances. "Mrs. Anderson," Dr. Phillips announced, her voice clinical and devoid of emotion. "But most concerning is the significant presence of a particular experimental pharmaceutical compound. It's typically used in controlled laboratory settings during early-stage drug testing. It is absolutely not something the general public should have access to, and it certainly doesn't belong in a cup of coffee." Nina's face paled even further, if that were possible. That's impossible," she stammered, her eyes darting towards the window where James was just visible. James said. "He said it was just something to cause mild temporary symptoms, like a bad flu." "Mild symptoms, Mrs. Anderson?" Detective Mendoza interrupted, her pen poised over her notebook. "Like the ones your sister-in-law, Mrs. Bennett, has reportedly experienced multiple times over the past 6 months after being in your company or consuming food or drink you or your brother prepared." Nina flinched as if struck. Before she could respond, the door opened again and another detective, a younger man in plain clothes, entered holding a large evidence bag. "Detective Mendoza," he said, "we executed the search warrant on Mr. James Anderson's office desk at the Anderson marketing firm as per your telephonic warrant." He presented the bag. "We found these." Inside were several small tinted glass bottles with clinical-looking labels, alongside a spiral-bound notebook filled with meticulous handwritten entries. The detective carefully laid them out on a cleared side table. I felt my knees weaken, a cold dread washing over me as I realized the full, horrifying scope of their plan. It wasn't just haphazard malice. It was calculated, almost scientific in its cruelty. "You were documenting everything," I whispered, staring at the notebook. "The dosages, my reactions. Like I was some kind of experiment?" My voice trembled. Despite my efforts to keep it steady, it wasn't like that, Nina protested weakly, but her voice wavered, lacking any conviction. We just needed to track what worked, what was effective. The first few attempts, they weren't strong enough. You kept showing up to meetings. You kept pushing through." Her admission hung in the air, chilling and repugnant. "So you increased the dosages," Detective Mendoza concluded, her voice flat and hard as she carefully examined one of the bottles through the plastic of the evidence bag. "Did you know, Mrs. Anderson, or you, Mr. Anderson," she called out, her voice carrying clearly to James in the hallway, "that these substances, particularly this experimental compound, could be lethal in higher concentrations or with repeated exposure?" The room fell silent. James, still visible through the window, sank heavily into a chair in the hallway, his head falling into his hands. He looked utterly defeated, a broken man. "The Henderson account," I said slowly, "the final, sickening pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. It was more than just wanting me to miss one presentation. It was bigger, darker. It wasn't just about that one presentation next week, was it, Nina? You needed me out of the way more permanently, or at least for a much longer period, because the Henderson client specifically requested me as their lead consultant on the project, didn't they? They were impressed with my preliminary work." Nina's face contorted with a flash of her old venomous anger mixed with a dawning desperate fear. "You were ruining everything," she spat, her voice cracking. "Everything I built, cultivated. That client portfolio for years, and then you just show up fresh out of nowhere. It's fresh out of nowhere, and suddenly everyone wants to work with you instead." James said he could fix it. He said he knew how to level the playing field. "By killing me, Nina?" The words hung in the air, heavy and stark with accusation. The room was silent, save for the rhythmic beeping of Nina's heart monitor. "We weren't trying to kill you," Nina started, her voice rising in a hysterical sob. But Dr. Phillips cut her off, her tone unyielding. "Mrs. Anderson, the concentration of the primary compound in the coffee you inadvertently drank today," the doctor stated, looking directly at Nina, her eyes like chips of ice. "This was significantly higher than what we can extrapolate from the residual markers we found in Mrs. Bennett's historical samples from her earlier hospital visits, which we are now cross-referencing. If she, Mrs. Bennett, had consumed that full cup this morning, given her previous exposures, which likely sensitized her system, the outcome could have been severe, possibly even fatal. You essentially ingested a potentially lethal dose intended for her." Detective Mendoza turned to the other officer. "We'll need a full forensic analysis of these bottles and that notebook. Get a warrant for both their homes and any other business premises, and contact the pharmaceutical company listed on these bottle labels immediately. Find out how they obtained these substances. We need to know if there's a broader diversion issue." Nina slumped back against her pillows, the last of the fight draining from her face, leaving her looking small and defeated. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," she whispered, tears now streaming down her pale cheeks. "James kept saying we just needed one more try, One more adjustment to the formula. He was so confident. Ah! I stepped closer to her. Bed, my voice steady, despite the maelstrom of emotions churning inside me. Every time I got sick, I said, my words precise and cold. Every important meeting I missed. Every client I potentially lost because I was too ill to function. Every night I spent in agony, you were both there, watching me, taking notes apparently, on how your poison was affecting me. What kind of people does that make you, Nina? Okay? What kind of brother did I marry? Okay? The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by Nina's quiet, wretched sobs. Outside in the hallway, I could hear the unmistakable sound of James being formally read his Miranda rights as additional uniformed officers arrived. He offered no resistance. Nina just stared at her trembling hands, unable to meet my gaze. Her carefully constructed world of ambition and deceit shattered into a million irreparable pieces. "Detective," I said, turning away from my sister-in-law, the sight of her pathetic unraveling bringing me no satisfaction, only a profound sense of sorrow and betrayal. I'm ready to make my formal, detailed statement now. The depths of their betrayal were almost unimaginable, a stark reminder that appearances can be fatally deceiving. If you've ever felt that something was deeply wrong in a situation, even when you couldn't articulate why, trust that instinct. Share this video if you believe in the power of truth and the courage it takes to unmask it, no matter how painful. The trial lasted 3 grueling weeks, but in the haze of recounting traumatic events and listening to chilling testimonies, it felt like an eternity condensed into an unbearable pressure cooker. I sat in the courtroom each day, a silent observer of my own life being dissected, my suffering laid bare for public consumption. I watched with a strange sense of detachment. As the prosecution team methodically and expertly laid out their comprehensive case against James, my husband, and Nina, my sister, the sheer weight of the evidence they presented was overwhelming. A methodical dismantling of any possible defense. There were the actual bottles of experimental compounds recovered from James's office desk, their clinical labels stark against the polished wood of the evidence table. There was the meticulously kept notebook, his research journal, as the prosecutor disdainfully called it, filled with dated entries detailing dosages, my observed reactions, and chillingly adjustments made for better efficacy. The recorded conversations, both mine and the ones I'd recovered from James's phone, were played in the hushed courtroom, Nina's ambitious plotting and James's eager complicity echoing in the silence. The text messages displayed on large screens painted a clear picture of their calculated conspiracy. Their coded language deciphered and explained by digital forensic experts. What struck me most throughout the proceedings was their demeanor. Nina, usually so polished, so impeccably confident and cutting in her remarks, looked small and diminished in her defendant's chair. Her expensive suits seemed to hang on her, and her once sharp gaze was often downcast, flitting nervously around the courtroom but never daring to meet mine for more than a fleeting, guilt-ridden second. James, on the other hand, couldn't even bring himself to look at me at all. He kept his eyes fixed on the floor or on his lawyer's table, a portrait of shame and brokenness as expert witnesses, toxicologists and pharmacologists detailed the potentially lethal effects of the substances they had systematically been administering to me. He looked like a man already defeated, a hollow shell of the charming person I thought I had married. Dr. Phillips's testimony was particularly damning. On the stand, she presented a comprehensive data-driven analysis, complete with charts and graphs, showing how they had gradually, methodically increased the dosages of various toxins over the months. She explained how the pattern of administration demonstrated a clear escalating intent to cause serious, prolonged harm, not just temporary illness. The representative from the pharmaceutical company, stern-faced woman from their legal department, confirmed that the specific experimental compounds found were proprietary, not available for public purchase, and that James had illicitly obtained them through a former college friend. who worked in their research and development department and had since been terminated and was facing separate charges. The web of deceit just kept expanding. The defendants, Mr. Anderson and Mrs. Anderson, showed a shockingly calculated and callous pattern of behavior. The prosecutor argued passionately in her closing statement, her voice ringing with conviction. This wasn't just a case of corporate sabotage or a petty family squabble gone too far. This was a systematic, insidious attempt to harm, to incapacitate, and ultimately, potentially to kill Mrs. Bennett. The escalation in dosages, meticulous record keeping, the timing of the incidents to coincide with crucial career moments. For the victim, it all points to a cold, premeditated plan executed over an extended period against a family member. Someone who should have been able to trust them implicitly. When the jury foreman finally stood to read the verdict after what felt like an agonizingly long deliberation, the courtroom was utterly silent. I held my breath, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. I felt no joy, no thrill of victory. Only a profound, bone-deep sense of relief and a heavy wave of exhaustion when the words were spoken. Both James and Nina were found guilty on multiple counts, including the most serious charges of attempted murder and conspiracy to commit murder. The judge's words as he delivered the sentencing a few days later echoed through the silent, packed courtroom, each syllable landing with the weight of justice. The premeditated and malicious nature of these actions, carried out against a close family member, under the guise of love and concern over such an extended period, demonstrates a profound depravity and a shocking disregard for human life. This court finds that such betrayal demands the maximum sentence allowable under law for these offenses. I watched almost numbly as they were led away in handcuffs, their faces pale and stunned, the reality of their future finally crashing down upon them. Nina shot me one last look, a mixture of hatred, disbelief, and a strange sort of pleading. But I felt nothing but a vast emptiness where my trust in them used to be. I thought about how insidious emotions like greed, envy, and unchecked ambition had managed to twist a people I once cared for. Two people I had welcomed into the deepest parts of my life, into something utterly unrecognizable, into monsters capable of such cruelty. Their successful business, which Nina had been so desperate to protect and expand at any cost, was now in ruins. Their reputations were irrevocably destroyed. Their freedom, gone. All of it sacrificed in their twisted, obsessive attempt to destroy me. The path to justice can be long and arduous, demanding immense courage to confront betrayal, especially from those we trust. Christina's resilience in the face of such adversity resonates with you. Or if you've ever had to fight for your own truth, consider sharing this story. Your share can be a beacon of hope for someone else navigating their own dark courtroom. 1 year after the trial, a year spent slowly, painstakingly rebuilding my life and my sense of self. I stood at the podium of the Nashville Business Leaders Annual Conference. I was there to give the keynote speech, an honor I had worked incredibly hard for even before the darkness with James and Nina had fully descended. The irony wasn't lost on me, not for a single moment. This stage, this audience, this recognition, this was exactly the kind of opportunity Nina had been so desperately, so violently trying to prevent me from achieving. The Henderson account, the very one she and James had been so maniacally focused on stealing from me, had been a resounding success. It had snowballed, leading to several more major clients, firmly establishing me as one of the top marketing executives in the entire region. My career, the thing they had tried to obliterate, was flourishing beyond my wildest dreams. Success, I began, my voice clear and steady as I looked out at the sea of expectant faces filling the grand ballroom, isn't just about raw talent or relentless hard work, though those are undeniably crucial. I paused, letting my words sink. In making eye contact with individuals in the audience, at its core, true, sustainable success is about integrity. It's about building genuine, authentic relationships. Relationships founded on a bedrock of trust and mutual respect. About collaboration, not sabotage. Another pause, this one more pointed. And sometimes, I continued, my voice softening slightly but losing none of its power. The biggest, most unexpected threats to our success, to our very well-being, can come from those closest to us. It's from the places we least expect. But surviving those challenges, I concluded, my gaze sweeping across the room. Emerging from those trials not broken, but tempered, makes us infinitely stronger. It forges a resilience within us that becomes our most valuable asset. The applause that followed was warm and sustained. After my speech, several young professionals, mostly women, approached me, their eyes bright with questions and a shared sense of determination. One young woman, her voice earnest, asked how I'd managed to maintain my composure and my focus throughout such a public and painful ordeal. It was a question I'd asked myself many times during those dark days. Focused on what I could control, I told her, and the small group that had gathered. My reactions, my decisions, my integrity. I meticulously gathered evidence. I trusted my instincts even when I was terrified and filled with self-doubt. And I absolutely refused to let fear or their attempts to intimidate me stop me from pursuing my goals and ultimately from seeking justice. I saw understanding and a flicker of recognition in their eyes. Later that evening, back in the quiet of my hotel room, I received an email from the CEO of the Henderson client. He was writing to personally confirm that they were renewing their multi-year contract with my firm, specifically requesting me to continue as their lead strategist. And they were significantly increasing the scope of our engagement. A small, genuine smile touched my lips. I thought about how differently things might have turned out if I hadn't trusted my instincts that fateful day at brunch, if I hadn't taken that terrifying leap of faith and switched those coffee cups. The local Nashville paper had run a small, almost buried article that morning. A brief mention on page 6, stating that Nina Anderson and James Anderson had recently begun serving there for, and we begun serving there. Lengthy prison sentences at separate state facilities. Their final appeals exhausted. I hadn't read it. I didn't need to. Their chapter in my life was well and truly closed. Instead, I opened my laptop and focused on the new proposal I was drafting for my newest client project, a dynamic tech startup with incredible potential. I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that the best revenge wasn't about gloating over their downfall or dwelling on the past. It was about moving forward, about building, about thriving, and about succeeding with my integrity intact despite and perhaps even because of those who had tried so desperately to hold me back, to silence me, to erase me. My story was now one of survival, resilience, and ultimately of triumph. And I was just getting started. My journey was a harrowing descent into a darkness I never imagined could exist so close to home. Orchestrated by those I should have been, able to trust implicitly. Yet, emerging from that crucible, I discovered a strength within myself I hadn't known I possessed. The scars remain, not as marks of victimhood, but as testaments to survival, to the resilience of the human spirit when pushed to its absolute limit. They remind me that even in the face of profound betrayal and calculated cruelty, integrity and truth can and must prevail. The path wasn't easy, and the healing is an ongoing process, but every new dawn feels like a victory hard won. Every success a reclamation of the life they tried to steal. The shadows of James and Nina's actions will likely always linger in some corner of my memory, a somber reminder of the potential for darkness that can hide behind even the most familiar smiles. But I choose not to live in those shadows. Instead, I choose to focus on the light of new opportunities, genuine connections, and the quiet, powerful satisfaction of knowing I faced the unimaginable and not only survived, but emerged more determined, more focused, and more unwilling to compromise on my own worth and the principles I stand for. Their attempts to diminish me ultimately fueled my resolve to shine even brighter. This story, my story, is a testament to the critical importance of listening to that small, persistent voice within your intuition. It's often quieter than the chaos around you, but it speaks the deepest truths. There were countless moments. I doubted myself, moments I was made to feel irrational or overly suspicious. Learning to trust my own perception, even when it was terrifying, was the key to my survival and, eventually, to unmasking the truth. It's a lesson I carry with me into every aspect of my life now, a guiding principle. Thank you for accompanying me through this recounting of a very difficult but ultimately transformative chapter of my life. Sharing it hasn't been easy, but I believe in the power of stories to connect us, to empower us, and perhaps to help someone else who might be navigating their own hidden battles. What resonated most with you in this journey? Was there a moment that particularly struck you, or a lesson you'll take away? I would be genuinely moved to read your reflections in the comments below. Your insights and shared experiences create a community of understanding and strength. If my story has touched you, or if you believe in the importance of resilience, truth, and the fight for justice, please consider showing your support by giving this video a like. And if you haven't already, warmly invite you to subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell. By doing so, you'll be the first to know when new stories of survival, courage, and overcoming adversity are shared. Every story has the power to make a difference, and your engagement helps these narratives reach those who may need to hear them. Most remember, no matter what challenges you face, your voice matters, your experiences are valid, and your strength is far greater than you might realize. Continue to seek truth, to trust your instincts, and to build a life defined by your own terms, rooted in integrity. Thank you again for watching, and I look forward to connecting with you in the comments and in future stories. Stay strong and keep shining.